Do you have a certain brand of knife that is more predominant in your collection than any other brand that you have? How's it going, everybody? I'm Rollshambo, the connoisseur and collector of all things sharp and shiny. And follow-up question, how many of those knives are Spydercos? Let me know in the comments section down below, and while you're down there, smack the like button. It helps out the channel a whole lot. Today, we're talking about this guy, the Spyderco Shaman, specifically the Blade Ops exclusive in Gray G10 and Elmax. You see, I've had it for the last couple of weeks, and here's the trend. Every time I do a video on a Spyderco knife, I get tons of people in the comments section letting me know that it's not this knife that's the best Spyderco, it's the Paramilitary 2 or the Para 3 or the blah. You see, everyone's got their opinions because Spyderco makes a lot of knives, and more importantly, they make a whole lot of great knives. So that debate is well earned. But it does make me wonder, will the rabbit hole ever end? Will I ever reach the bottom and say that I've gotten them all and now I can decisively tell you which one is the best? I don't think that's possible, but we're going to try. Because I have 6 Spydercos in my collection, and currently, according to my leaderboard, the best one is either the Spyderco Para 3 or the Smock. And today, we're going to do another episode of Grail or Garbage. It's a series where I systematically and categorically rank and review knives like this Shaman, so that you have the context that you need to decide, does it deserve a spot in your pocket? Does it deserve a spot in your display case? Here's how it works. Grail or Garbage consists of 5 categories. Those categories are materials, ergonomics, Fidget Factor, the lock, and then finally fit and finish. Each category is worth a max of 10 points. At the end, we'll add up all the scores and pop it on our public leaderboard, which currently looks a little bit like this. Now that I'm done answering all the tough questions, the only question left to answer is the Spyderco Shaman a Grail? Or is it garbage? So here we are. It's time that we finally go ahead and score this Shaman. And here's the thing. Every time I do a Grail or Garbage or a video of any kind for that matter, talking about a certain Spyderco knife, people love to point out the other Spyderco knives, and this is one that has gotten pointed out a lot. Let's go ahead and get into it. The first category is materials. Now, with materials is weighed heavily against a couple different things. First and foremost is the price, and the price on this knife is $235 at Blade Ops. The other thing that it's highly weighed against is the availability, because it doesn't matter how much something costs if you can't buy it, even if you do have the money. So let's talk about that. This specific one, and I am ranking this as a specific model, is the Blade Ops exclusive. So what do you get with the Blade Ops exclusive that you do not get on the run-of-the-mill S30V version? Well, for starters, you get these Gray G10 handle scales, and then the second most important ingredient is this Elmax blade. Now, Elmax here is the key, because when you're talking about blade steel is going to be, half your knife. And it's very, very important because it's what you're going to be using. So the blade steel being Elmax is what really drew me to this specific knife. Now, this knife was part of a swap that I did with a member of the audience. They reached out to me about another knife that I had, and yeah, we did a swap. Whenever there's a Shaman exclusive or a Shaman sprint run, they go like hotcakes, and sometimes in a matter of minutes. So you have to be there to get one, or you have to get a good deal on the secondary market. With all that being said, the materials are G10 handle scales, Elmax blade, matching Elmax backspacer. You have a compression lock right there, steel stamped pocket clip, phosphor bronze washers. So yeah, very, very simple. There's not like 50 different materials. And if you don't like those materials, one of the greatest things about Spyderco is that there's a ton of aftermarket options. Elmax is so cool. It's such an underrated steel. It's very similar to M390, but unlike M390, it's easier to work with. And so it's easier to sharpen. It's easier for them to get the higher HRC. I believe that what you want to aim for is around 62 HRC. And I'm pretty positive that Spyderco hit the mark on that. So you get all of the benefits of M390 with none of the drawbacks. And that's phenomenal. It makes for a really, really good user steel, and one that we frankly just don't see enough of. In a world that's dominated by 20CV, S35VN, and M390, Elmax is a welcome and refreshing sight. Now, because of the availability being nil, exclusives come around, once, maybe twice a year for a model, and then they're gone. And with the Shamans, they go so fast. And so that availability really drives up the value as far as the scoring system is concerned, because it's really hard to get one of these unless you get it on the secondhand market. And I was lucky enough to get one that was in great condition. So because the availability is scarce, and because you can only get it in Elmax as a Blade Ops exclusive, and because I'm such a big fan of that, I've got to give it a 9 out of 10 for materials. Moving forward, the second category is ergonomics, and this is a category that I didn't think would ever be dominated by a Spyderco that wasn't named the Para 3, and that's because the Para 3 just fits so perfectly in my hand, even though it is a slab style construction. Now on this one, you'll notice that there's quite a bit of contouring to these G10 handle scales. Now this is really, really awesome because they curve around into your hand. And as far as the Spyderco is concerned, it is hand-meltingly good. It's really, really close to perfect. This has a beautiful front finger cutout, and I'm not going to call it a choil because it's not really a choil. You get a plunge grind with, with the flat ground blade right here. And then of course you have this jimping on the back, which is very, very well placed. So it's right behind your index finger on the spine of the blade. That's great. In a reverse grip, you can get a choked up reverse grip, or you can go back, and it's comfortable in both positions. The only detractor, and it's only a slight detractor, is the stamped pocket clip. A lot of people really like it, which is why they've been able to get away with continuing to manufacture this spoon bill clip. I will be replacing that clip very shortly. I'll probably be getting something similar to this MXG deep carry. I know many of you are big fans of the Lynch Northwest, but go ahead and pop your suggestions. What clip should I replace the stock Shaman clip with? Let me know in the comment section down below. Moving back to ergonomics, because they contoured the handle scales, this is the first Spyderco I've had that has contoured handle scales. It should be a prerequisite. I don't know why they couldn't do this on the Paramilitary 2, which is just flat slabs. But adding that depth, adding that dimension, that curvature to the side of the handle scales really makes this very, very comfortable and something that's desirable to hold in the hand. It even makes me forget how bad the pocket clip is, which I think is pretty bad, but you know what? A lot of people disagree. However, this is my ranking system and my channel, so I'm going to go ahead and say that I don't like the pocket clip because I think it's bad ergonomics. That being said, it's good enough for me to score it a best in class for Spyderco as a 9 out of 10 for ergonomics. Now the next category is Fidget Factor. How much do you want to play with this thing? Is it easy to play with? What kind of action? How good is the detent? The deployment methods. Give me all the skinny. Well, so let's start off with the detent. The detent on here is not legendary by any stretch, but it is definitely passable. It breaks free right about there. And so, yeah, it's nice and clicky. It's not the best detent in the world, but it's also not the worst. And it's something that serves its purpose quite well. Then of course you have to talk about this legendary Spidey hole. Spyderco was one of the first companies to really start doing this, and that's kind of their trademark. That is the #1 way to deploy this blade, although if you wanted to, you could do a Spidey drop, and that works very well as well. Reverse flick works great. Yeah, it's a lot of fun to fidget with. Let's talk about the pivot. The pivot is running on phosphor bronze washers. Now, typically these days, you might think, well, gosh, why haven't they just switched over to bearings? Well, you know what? It actually has a lot to do with the feel of deployment. I mentioned this with my Strider AR75, but so there's just something about really nicely worn in phosphor bronze washers that is just really smooth and really, really pleasant to feel. That it's not, some people will call it hydraulic, but just that smoothness, you know, that's awesome. However, unlike my Strider AR75, this one can be reverse flicked, can be Spidey flicked, and it just works really well. It lends to a beautiful feel in the hand and something that I just want to keep fidgeting with. Now, there is one slight detractor, and this is also going to carry on into the locks, and let's talk about that for a second. Here, you'll notice that this little nubbin right there. Now, that does complete the finger choil, but you'll also see that a lot of people will go ahead and just grind that off, and I'll show you why. When you close it, you have to release your finger because that little nubbin will come out and it will punch the tip of your finger, and that's not necessarily comfortable or great for closing it, because if you don't time it just right, you're either letting go too soon, or you're getting your finger pushed out of the way by that nub, or it's not going to close all the way. None of those situations are ideal, so you really have to time it right. Now, there are some fixes for that out there. One of the fixes being that OCD for EDC has a little button thing that just adheres to that tab, and it goes around that nub, so it allows you to actuate the lock without having that nub really be a problem, and so that's nice. That is something that you can get, but it's not something that comes on here stock, so I can't necessarily just, you know, ignore that fact. Aside from that one thing, fidgeting with this knife is a lot of fun. Just getting that feel down, getting the timing right for releasing the compression lock when you're snapping it shut, like, that's really great. And the ergonomics also help with that, because there's nothing uncomfortable about wielding this knife and about flicking it and opening it and closing it. And it also helps that the balance point is right underneath that compression lock, so it's right there. And that's great because it's exactly where you want the knife to be. You want the balance to be right underneath where your index finger is. That's your controlling finger. And that really helps, you know, even if you like to do some of those, you know, tacky hand flips that I like doing, it's fun, and that balance adds to the mix as well. Ultimately, the fidget factor on here is great. It's not the most amazing, but it's pretty dang good, and I would say just as good as any other Spyderco for that matter, and especially when we're talking about, you know, the Para 3 or the Paramilitary 2, the fidget factor on here is good, and I'm going to be giving it an 8 out of 10 for fidget factor. Moving right along, we got to talk about this lock a little bit more. Now, I already mentioned that I really don't like the way that that tab flicks into your finger, and actuating that with any kind of, you know, one-handed option is difficult, and that's kind of where this knife doesn't shine as much. And I mean, is it usable? Yeah. Does it absolutely kill the experience? No. And it's still a compression lock at the end of the day, which is one of my favorite knife locks. I think that more knives out there should have a compression lock, and honestly, I'm waiting for the day that Spyderco says, you know what, have at it. The general public can have the compression lock. We're not going to just sit on it any longer. We're going to allow other manufacturers to use that, because I'd love to see this on more knives. You know what I wouldn't love to see? This little chode right here sticking out next to that lock, because I don't care who you are, that's really hard to avoid unless you're releasing the lock when you're closing it. And you know, that in itself, just the actuation of having to release your finger from the compression lock when you're flipping it closed. That's something that I do have to take into account. And so while I love the compression lock, that is a big detractor. Let's talk about lockup here for a second. Now on this one, there is no blade play up, down, left, or right. There is no pivot lash. When it breaks the D10, it's opening. There's nothing in between there. As far as the blade centering is concerned, yeah, there it is, damn near perfect. And that's great. I really, really, really enjoy this knife. As far as the lock is concerned, it's a good lock, but honestly, from the factory, they should just redesign this to get rid of that nubbin, just flat across, or better yet, you know, just deepen that finger choil a little bit, you know, something, but get rid of that nubbin. We shouldn't have to buy an extra piece for that to not be an issue. And while it does show up on the Spyderco Paramilitary 2 as well, it's not as big of an issue. I can close this without my finger running into that nubbin. It shows up here as well, but because that nubbin is a little bit shallower, it's not as big of an issue, and it's not really running into my finger as much. That is kind of the one downside of the Shaman is that they should get rid of that. A lot of people grind that off, but I shouldn't have to do that on a knife that's really difficult to get in the first place. For those reasons, it's going to get a less than stellar 6 out of 10 for the lock. All right, now finally, we're on to the category that brings us all together. Let's talk about the fit and finish. How good is the fit and finish? And it's not just about how well manufactured it was. Let's talk about the design. This is a Sal Glesser design. Sal Glesser is the godfather of Spyderco, who has been, you know, gradually handing the reins over to Eric Glesser, who made this guy. This is the Spyderco Manix 2. And the Manix 2 is a great knife, and in many ways I feel like the Manix 2 was built as kind of an homage to the Shaman, as in like the Shaman's son. If the Shaman had a son, its name would be Manix, and it would be a little crazy, but maybe not as well refined. And that's kind of how I feel about the Manix 2. I love the Manix 2, but let's not get it twisted. This is the OG, the daddy-o. This is what's going to lead the tribe into battle, you know, spiritually. Okay, maybe not. I might be reaching, okay, but regardless, Sal Glesser did an amazing job. Let's talk about the lines real quick. This has a beautiful bow line. There's nothing interrupting it. There's no weird swedges up like you get on the Paramilitary 2. Granted, I don't mind that, and it does give a nice spot for your thumb, but it's more of a classical style where everything is just in a hard use position. And you know, you could tell that when he designed the Shaman, it was meant to be a knife that didn't sit in a display case. It was a knife that was meant to be used. And also the fact that you can do tip up, tip down, left or right. The clip is polydextrous. I'm not going to call it ambidextrous because you can do it in 1, 2, 3, 4 different positions. Whatever your speed is, you can change the clip over. Thank you, Spyderco. I do know that some people that are left-handed do have an issue actuating the compression lock left-handed. So, you know, there is that, but I do have to mention that you can change the clip over wherever you would like. The thought process that went into contouring the G10 handle scales, I absolutely love it. I would love to see that on more Spyderco knives, and maybe as I experience more Spyderco knives, I'll run into that more as well. But so far, this is my only Spyderco knife that has contoured handle scales. I can't wait to replace the handle scales on here with titanium, not because I really dislike the G10, because I don't, but because that's just who I am. I think that this is the perfect knife to be overbuilt. More things that this knife has that other Spydercos don't is a blade steel matching backspacer. And yes, I would have preferred if the backspacer had come up to like here, but that would have increased the weight quite a lot. And in this case, you know what? The fact that it's there at all is really cool. You do have this lanyard hole here and this pocket clip, which annoys me even more than most Spyderco pocket clips do, because the lanyard hole goes directly through it, and it's not the same pocket clip screw pattern as it is on almost every other Spyderco that could possibly cost this much. which is a little bit annoying because I can't switch the clips off my others. And some people are going to say, well, I mean, you could use the bottom 2 screw holes, and yeah, they're right, but it's not going to be on there solid. I need a Shaman specific clip replacement. So again, if you haven't done so already, pop in my comments section, let me know which clip I should buy. For all of those reasons, you already know that the heat treat on here is going to be fantastic. The blade is centered. There's no extra edges that shouldn't be there. The ergonomics are great. And for all those reasons and more, this is going to be getting an 8 out of 10 for fit and finish. All right, so it's time to do a little bit of math. Materials were a 9. Ergonomics was a 9. Fidget Factor was an 8. The lock was a 6. And then finally, the fit and finish was an 8. If you add all those scores together, you get a best in class 40 out of 50. Is this a Grail? You know what? I'm going to say it's almost a Grail. Could you make this a Grail with a few small modifications? Absolutely. You put in the tab from OCD for EDC so that extra thing isn't an issue, or you grind it off yourself. You replace the pocket clip. The small things like that would make a huge difference and wouldn't necessarily change the overall look and feel of this knife. The fact that this is the only one that I know of that has these contoured G10 handle scales also makes it somewhat special as well. I love the thought that went behind putting in a matching blade steel backspacer, because Spyderco is not necessarily known for including those. This knife is very much the same secret sauce that Spyderco has that makes all of their knives so good, and yet it's different. And I'm going to say it's my favorite Spyderco so far. I've carried this knife a lot. No matter what else I've been carrying, I've also been carrying this. If I'm carrying 2 knives over the last couple weeks, one of them will have been this Shaman. And I don't regret a single second of it. The knife is sharp, the knife feels good in the hand, it's fun to play with, the action is perfect. Honestly, this is my favorite Spyderco, but you let me know in the comments section down below. Did I miss it this time around? Do I need to rescore the Spyderco Paramilitary 2? Is it better than what I scored that at? Or am I just off my rocker and the Para 3 is still the best Spyderco money can buy? Let me know. If you liked the video, make sure you give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like it, boo-hoo, there's a button for you too. And if you want to see more content just like this, make sure you hit subscribe. I'm Rollshambo. I'll catch you on the flip side.